Good evening, friends, and shalom, and blessings to you all in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Welcome to this episode of Un-Apologetics, the show where we are unapologetic about apologetics, and I am your host, CJ Cox. I want to go ahead and briefly acknowledge some of the folks we have in the live chat. My brother Kevin, sister Laura, and brother Keith Colvin are all here. Thank you all very much for being here. I appreciate you guys. And of course, blessings in Christ to you. If anybody else is here, or to any of you three, please do remember to like and share this video, and please consider subscribing to the channel if you're new here. Hit that bell to get notified every time we go live, which is infrequently these days, but it's going to start picking up here soon. If you guys are here, please remember to share this out to the different social media platforms which you frequent. Definitely want to get this information out to the public, if indeed it is worthy of getting out to the public. And of course, that's a determination for you guys to make. And yeah, I want to just thank everybody who's here again, like, share, subscribe, all that good jazz. Want to go ahead and give you guys some brief announcements. Just get through the channel housekeeping here real quickly. First thing I want to announce is that we have a debate. I'll be hosting it here. I don't have the thumbnail up yet. It's going to be a formal debate, so not like the conversation we're having today, but full on with the, times and rebuttal and all that kind of stuff. It's going to be me and a gentleman by the name of Darth Vader. Calls himself Darth Vader. Actually, he has been on the Gospel Truth, so some of you guys have probably heard that. And he's also been on this channel a couple times in the open rooms, so you may have also heard him speak here. But we're going to be talking about whether or not the creation was, he uses the word perfect, I use the word ideal. What we mean to describe is there death, is there error, is there suffering in the original creation pre-fall? I, of course, being a younger creationist, say no, and he takes the position that indeed there is. And so that's going to be the discussion we're having. Again, that's Darth Vader, and that'll be on this channel this coming Sunday. I do have to ask around and see if I can get a moderator, but nonetheless, we'll be crossing that bridge when we get to it, hopefully here pretty soon. Another thing I want to announce, me and Kevin's Biblical Discussions, who is currently in the live chat right now, are going to have a discussion this Monday on eternal security and whether or not eternal security is an issue that must be a dividing line. In other words, if one is an eternal security proponent and another is not, are we able to call each other brothers in Christ? Is there nuance to that potentially? And that's going to be, I think, a pretty good conversation for us to have. I think it's a necessary conversation to have too, considering the fact that that's a very important conversation we've had, recently, almost going on a year now, right? It's been the dominating conversation of this area of the internet. So I think that I'm, really looking forward to that conversation. And then last announcements here. This coming month, April, we're going to have 2 separate episodes of our Hag Sameach series, which is actually quite useful considering the conversation we're going to be having today. So on April the 15th, we will be discussing, that's a Friday, by the way, we will be discussing the Passover. I'll be doing my Hag Sameach video on the Passover, and I think that's going to be an absolutely excellent conversation. Now, of course, I'm tooting my own horn there because it's just me talking to you guys. So hopefully you guys agree with me. But nonetheless, I really like discussing these holidays. It's kind of become my favorite thing to talk about, hence the series existence itself. And Passover is one of the coolest holidays on the Jewish calendar. So I think that's going to be really cool. And then 2 days after that, on Sunday, we'll be doing a Hag Sameach episode on Easter, which, of course, is the topic of conversation for today. But if you guys are interested in those 2 things, again, that's April the 15th, Hag Sameach on Passover, April the 17th, Hag Sameach on Easter. They'll get you 2 episodes this particular month, whereas we've had, we had 1 in January on Epiphany, 1 in February on Candlemas, 1 in March on Purim, and now we're going to actually have 2 in 1 month, and actually just back to back, right? Friday, then Saturday, or Sunday, excuse me. So that's going to definitely be very fun. They're obviously very intricately related holidays. At least that's the way the lore works out, right? I only say that because we're going to have a conversation about precisely that, so I don't want to poison the well. But nonetheless, if you guys are interested in that, definitely do go there. The thumbnails for those 2 in particular are actually already up. So if you want to go like, share, hit the reminder, anything like that, you can certainly go ahead and do that. So that's all of the channel housekeeping that we got for today. Don't have anything major scheduled as far as debates or interviews or anything like that. Obviously, we're always working on bringing you guys quality content, but we've been having a little bit of a lull to start this year. There's no real reason for it. It's just kind of what's happening, right? It happens every so often. So we'll get, some of those here pretty soon. But nonetheless, I think, with today's conversation, with those 4 episodes coming up, and then obviously with regular content that'll just be up, it's going to be a pretty fun week here. So let's go ahead and jump into our prayer real quick, and then I'm going to let you guys know what our conversation is about today, what we're looking to talk about, and introduce you to our guest, who, of course, many of you guys are familiar with already. But nonetheless, let's go ahead and say a brief prayer here. Heavenly Father, I just want to thank you for everything that you blessed us with here today, Lord. I want to thank you for the opportunity today to have a conversation, Lord Jesus, about you and what it is that we should be doing to serve you, Lord, about something as benign as holidays. And I put it that way, Lord, just because the fact that we can discuss these things in a peaceful environment is just evidence of the blessings you've bestowed upon us, Lord Jesus. I just want to pray that we use those fully to your advantage, Lord Jesus, to our advantage as Christians and not as people itself, Lord. In other words, not carnal advantage, but spiritual advantage, Lord, edification and revelation, so that we may have greater relationship with you. I pray that you guide this conversation to be fruitful, Lord. I pray that you guide it to be edifying to all involved. I pray that you give an anointing of the Holy Spirit to both me and Alec, as well as everybody in the audience here, that we may all get to know what it is that you would like us to know, Lord. And I ask these things in Jesus Christ's name, and we give you the glory. Amen. Righty. So, friends, today we're going to be talking a little bit about Easter. We're going to be talking about whether or not there are any pagan origins in Easter. Obviously, this is a conversation that'll probably jump around as far as the specifics, but we'll see what happens, right? Obviously, we're going to have that talk, but there's obviously, when this kind of stuff comes up, you talk about stuff like, the day, the name, the possibility of old festivals, Easter bunny, eggs, all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of different stuff here, to talk about. So it's probably going to be a very fun conversation. What we're going to do is have each of us have 10-minute opening statements, just so we can lay out our positions very clearly. And then we're going to jump right into an open dialogue that'll take as long as it decides to take. I think I'm going to give us a hard cutoff of an hour of open conversation, just because at that point, that's a pretty long conversation to have. That tends to be what we do in these modern day debate discussions and stuff like that. You know what I mean? But nonetheless, with the 10 minutes and then the hour there, that'll be an hour and 20 minutes of discussion. And then if any of you guys got questions, we could even probably do a little Q&A afterwards, just to, so in other words, we're blending informal discussion and formal debate here today.
This is friendly chatter.
Exactly. And by the way, go ahead and introduce yourself, Alec, because here is my guest, Alec Cox, and thank you for being here.
Oh, looks like we got some people in here that I know. Hey, Keith Colvin, Kevin's Biblical Discussions. We got Germania. Nice. Glad you can come for the chat. Who else am I missing? Probably a couple others. But no, JC, I've listened to your show. You're very well-mannered. For somebody that basically trusts the Lord, I see this as my entry into a lot more discussions and a lot more fervor with the not you, but the enemy. So I've had it on my heart for a long time to start my own channel, and basically I've started, but it's just been kind of a wavering thing. I just need to dive into it now. But no, as far as this, you want me to go ahead and start with my intro on what it's about?
Well, I'll pass to you here in just 1 second. I just want to say briefly, number one, if you want to download this and upload it to your channel, feel free.
Excellent.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, anything that you ever do on my channel, you're free to do that. This is my official permission for you, right? So you don't have to ask again.
Awesome.
And also, would you mind just dropping us a link real quick to that, either in the live chat or you can put it in the private chat and I can drop it in the live chat just so we can get people to check out the channel?
That's the only thing I find confusing about the StreamYard. Does it go with the actual name that's on the StreamYard, or does it go with the because it has a link which is different than the actual, it's just Alec Cox is what my shows up on my screen when I do a stream. I've done some practice, so I don't know exactly how to name it yet. It's like I haven't had a lot of time playing around with it.
So the best way to do it is typically to actually copy the link on YouTube itself and then drop that link. Gotcha. I might have found yours already because I actually just decided to do a brief search here. So I'm going to send it to you really quick in the private chat just to make sure I got the right one.
Awesome.
And if that's right, I'll go ahead and drop that in the live chat.
Yeah. Okay, that's the right one. Perfect.
All righty, friends. So then here is the link to Alec's channel if you guys are interested. And then, yeah, I'm going to get you the solo layout. Let me know if you need to share screen. And on your start, we'll go ahead and time 10 minutes.
I'll share screen, after this. I'm just going to go through some basics of, I'm going to start with Lent because that's, you have Ash Wednesday and then you have Fat Tuesday and all that fun stuff and how that came about right now. And then I'll get into the Easter part of it and how it all came in through. So then I can share a screen, the next go around. That cool?
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right. So this is starting of the month of Nisan, and in Exodus 12, Moses was told by God as they're fleeing Egypt that this will be the first month for the Hebrews. Okay, so Nisan is the first month, which falls March, April. It always, 30-day calendar. It's a little bit confused. They have a 19 cycle thing. So 0 year, 3 year, 6 year, 8 year. They add an extra month, which is Adar. And so that makes it more balanced. And that's why you have a little bit of a difference between your Easter celebration and Passover for the Hebrews. So that's a little bit on that. Now, Lent is a little bit of a different thing. So starting with the Babylonian days and all the pagan worship that, Abraham came out of, Abram at the time, basically they were doing all that worship under many different names, Semiramis, Ishtar, Astarte. It just depends if it was a Sumerian area, Canaanite area, or a Babylonian area. So Babel was started by Nimrod. Nimrod supposedly married Semiramis. And then you have Nimrod being killed. I was listening to Jungle Jargon the other day. He suspects it was actually Esau, which could have been because they're kind of contemporaries, if you will, the great-grandson of Noah. But Esau was a little bit further than that with Isaac, so there's a little bit of an age difference. You have, with Lent, because of the death of Nimrod, Semiramis, we'll just call her that for right now. She was without a husband, without a child. So somehow she got pregnant and she blamed it on Nimrod becoming the sun god and then coming down. And one day the sun's rays got her and she was impregnated, and she 9 months later had Tammuz. And Tammuz's birthday just happens to fall on December 25th. And so that was the beginning of Tammuz. Now, Tammuz gets to the age of around 40 years old, and then Tammuz is eaten by wild boar, or wild boars, I guess. So you have an introduction there of the 40 years of age, right? Then you have your Fat Tuesday, and then you have your Ash Wednesday, and then you have Lent, 40 days of fasting. You cannot eat meat during Lent. Well, fast forward a little bit, and in Ezekiel and Jeremiah, you hear about Tammuz, and the women were wailing at the gate for Tammuz, and that's part of Lent. So Lent is basically giving up something and all that. So Lent is the beginning of, has nothing to do with Christianity whatsoever, has nothing to do with Hebrews whatsoever. It's basically a totally pagan side of ancient Babylonia, ancient Assyria, even ancient Akkad. So you can spell that ACC or AKK, whichever place you go. So basically, the Lent season with Fat Tuesday, a lot of people call it Mardi Gras. Okay, the beginning of Mardi Gras. If you've ever seen the pictures of that, you know what goes on there, and that's why a lot of people go there. I personally have never been to Mardi Gras for reasons that I just don't want to go there. So the basis of those 40 days until Easter, you're supposed to give up eating any meat. Now, since Tammuz was killed by wild boars, right, that's why they have the Easter ham, because all pigs have to pay the price for killing Tammuz. So that's just a little bit about Tammuz. Basically, you can find that in Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Leviticus 23 verse 10. Basically, is starting with numbers. It's kind of interchangeable. There's a lot of information on that. So happening at this year, there's 3 distinct holidays that are going on simultaneously. I think the last time was 2000. So it's been about 22 years since it's happened this way. So you have the salvation, justification, sanctification, and glorification. And those are all wrapped up in Passover, 14th of Nisan. So you have the salvation, which is Jesus Christ dying on the cross at Passover. And then you have what they call the Feast of Unleavened Bread that starts the day after Passover, which Passover is all included as 7 days, but the Feast of Unleavened Bread was as they came out of Egypt. So basically there's basically the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And then a few days later, you have the Feast of First Fruits, which is called, where is it here? It's hard to pronounce, actually. Erev Pesach, or the beginning of what it is. So if you know Genesis, Bereshit, in the beginning, then you also have Chag Matzot, which is basically your Feast of Unleavened Bread. So those generally 2 carry on, but the Feast of First Fruits follows a few days after the beginning of, from the 15th onto the 15th until the 16th. So it's kind of the times of Jesus when that happened. So if it's, so that's why the next day they had a Sabbath, because that was the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And then the following time was when Jesus rose, was the Feast of First Fruits. He's the first fruits of the resurrection. Nobody had resurrected from the death as he did. Some people say, oh, yeah, well, he raised Lazarus from the dead. That's not the same. It's basically, so if you look at the resurrection of the dead during the rapture, things like that, that is a true resurrection from the death. They were done out, and it had nothing to do with Jesus raising them. It's basically raising Lazarus. It had a lot to do with how Jesus came out of the grave, and then we had the start of Christianity right off the bat. One last thing, and then I'll hand it over. So the 15th of Nisan is always the first day of unleavened bread. The 14th of Nisan is always Passover, always. And that's why you have this discrepancy between Sunday. Now, Sunday worship, as far as, the third day, because it was the first day of the week, is when Mary went to the tomb. So everybody, first day of the week, it must have been Sunday. But it doesn't really, they had to squash that, Good Friday, where he's, killed on Calvary, into 2.5 days. And so they kind of jumble around the evening begins with the Hebrews for the next day. So the next day, like in Genesis, evening and the morning was the first day, evening and the morning was the second day. So the evening is basically the start of their next day. and it was about 6 o'clock when it was a pilot. And still, even that's a slim amount of time for them to get that together. So a lot of historians and things like that have looked back and tried to figure out how they fit that day into it. But just going off of the 14th and the 15th of Nisan, but this year on the actual Sunday, okay, is going to be. That's why they have the next was the Sabbath. So there's actually 4 Sabbaths because you have the Saturday Sabbath as well for the Hebrews. So the next one is going to be your Feast of First Fruits. So they had 4 Sabbaths, 3 Sabbaths, and then including the Saturday Sabbath, which is a regular Sabbath to be held every, instead of Sunday. So that's just a little bit of what, gets rid of Lent. And then it comes into, how Easter, was also brought forward by leaders, not necessarily by the true Christians. The apostles never mentioned anything about Easter. The first century Christians never mentioned anything about it in any of the writings. You have to go to Eusebius, you have to go to a lot of Greek, and you have to go to a lot of Latin in order to find anything to do with anything about Sunday. And that's when we get into Constantine. So I'll hand it over to you. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. And that was actually just about perfect. There's 20 seconds left on the clock here. Let me get you out of the solo layout. There we go. And then I'll restart this here. I'll put myself in the solo layout, and I appreciate you. Not typically used to this, my friends. I'm sorry. Should probably be better at it considering the fact that I have done it sometimes.
Don't worry about it. We told we both agreed it was a lazy day.
Yeah, for sure. Exactly.
With everything else happening.
No kidding. Well, that's the thing about being an adult, right? You get your day off, and that's where you got to put absolutely everything. So, but all right. So let's go ahead and shoot here. So I will probably not take the full 10 minutes, and just so you guys know, right now I don't have a prepared remarks, but I'm not responding to anything Alex said. We're going to do that during the open discussion. I'm just going to kind of make a little bit of my own case here, so to speak, right? So, question that we have here before us at the moment is, of course, is Easter pagan? Does it have any origins that are pagan? Is there, is the name pagan? Just what are the different potential pagan relations? It's so on and so forth. And I don't believe, based on the studies that I have had so far, that there is any of the pagan association that we typically hear people associate with Easter. So I'm going to give you guys a brief history of Easter and just kind of show you where it developed and how it developed out of Christianity. And then, of course, we're going to, have some questions back and forth on each of the respective models. And so, yeah, I hope this is edifying for all you guys. So, our earliest reference to the holiday Easter, first off, it's not called Easter originally. Actually, at the time, and to this day, in Latin and Greek-speaking churches, and especially in the Greek Orthodox world, such as Greece itself, the Slavic countries, Russia, Turkey, the Middle East, so on and so forth, they actually refer to it as Pascha or Pascha. Now, we would call it Pascha, it's Pascha. They would typically have more of a Pascha with the heavy K there, or even a Pascha, right, with the more heavy guttural sound. But nonetheless, that's the original name that they actually called it. That's actually derived from a Hebrew term that you may or may not have heard, which is Pesach. Pesach is actually the Hebrew name for Passover. And there's a reason actually for this. It's because the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, if you read the New Testament, was said to have taken place on Passover. And so, he's crucified on a Friday. That Friday happens to be the Passover day, which Passover today can refer to either the day itself or the entire 7-day holiday. In the Bible, it's referring only to that first holiday in the day, right? And they would usually call it the Festival of the Jews or the Feast of Unleavened Bread when they're talking about the whole thing. There's multiple days that are associated with Passover in the Passover week, right? There is the Passover day itself, the Festival of Unleavened Bread, the first fruits, and so on and so forth. So you can have different names that end up interchanging around it. Nonetheless, I digress. Pesach is what you call it in Hebrew. And 2 days after that Passover day, you have a Sunday where Jesus is said to have resurrected according to the New Testament, right? And so you can see the resurrection and Passover itself ended up being intricately linked from that point on. And of course, if you're a believer, you think that God did that on purpose, right? That Jesus was indeed the Paschal Lamb, which is not one of our points of contention here, by the way. It's just, laying out the history for you guys, right? So this is why you end up having the name Pascha or Pascha in the Greek Orthodox world to this day. And our first reference to it comes from a gentleman by the name of Melito of Sardis. And it's in the early 2nd century, sometime around the 150s. For context for you guys, that's nearly 200 years before, closer probably to about 180, but nonetheless, before the infamous Council of Nicaea that was called by Constantine. And Melito of Sardis actually gives us a full homily on this already established holiday of Pascha, which by his time had already been well established within the Christian community. Now, there's a couple things that are important to note here. Number one, the Christians do not have any political capital at this point, will not gain any for another 200 years. Number two, that at Melito's time, this was considered firmly established. And number three, and this is the most important thing, both Melito and a later, but still kind of contemporary, only like 20 to 30 years later, writer named Irenaeus, can both actually reference times before their own births when famous Christian leaders were celebrating this holiday. So, for example, Irenaeus recounts to us a time when, I can't remember the Latin gentleman's name, but he actually ended up meeting with Polycarp, who was from Asia Minor, would have been a Greek speaker, and they had a conversation about what came to be known as the Quartodeciman controversy. Long and short of it is, do we celebrate the resurrection on the first Sunday of the Passover week, or do we celebrate the resurrection on the actual Passover day? And the people in the Eastern world typically would follow the model of celebrating it on the actual Passover day. The people in the Western world, which would be like your, Western Europe and stuff like that, would typically celebrate on the first Sunday that was after that particular Passover day. And they, kind of just agreed to live and let live about it. But the point for this conversation is that that conversation existed. It happened, right? In other words, this is a holiday that is well established even by the early 100s, right? And that's something we've been able to figure out via the historical record. The other thing that makes that incredibly interesting is that Polycarp was actually a disciple of John himself. So we have the disciples of the disciples already celebrating this Easter holiday, and we even have them celebrating it two different ways. One in the celebration of Passover itself without creating an additional holiday, and one in the celebration of the first Sunday of the Passover week, which is kind of the origin of our modern day Easter, right? So this holiday ends up becoming a very popular holiday. It's arguably the oldest of the Christian holidays. That's not including, your Passover, your Sukkot, anything like that, but the later Christian holidays like Christmas and Ascension and stuff like that. Easter is potentially the oldest of those, right? And it's not until about the year 325 AD when at the Council of Nicaea, Constantine decided, because people were incredibly anti-Jewish at that time, that the Quartodecimans, which would be the Christians who celebrated it on the 14th of Nisan, were basically excommunicated, that they weren't allowed to do that anymore, right? But bear in mind, this has been a well-established holiday at that point for nearly 200 years. Now, we don't actually get the name Easter for another 600 years after that, potentially 500 years. It kind of depends on how reliable you think some of the information is. But the first reference to this holiday as Easter, or Oster, as it would have actually been originally written, comes from a gentleman by the name of Bede the Venerable, or the Venerable Bede. You can actually see it written both ways. And according to him, there was a month that the Anglo-Saxons would typically call, it's like Osteron or something like that. I have it written down somewhere here, so we'll be able to get a better pronunciation in a moment. And that month was named after their spring goddess, who they called Oster. And when they stopped being pagans, it just so happens that that was the same month that people were also celebrating Passover and Easter, right? In other words, they all would fall in the same month. And so in this new tongue, they would end up calling the holiday Easter, this Old English tongue, right? They would end up calling the holiday Easter rather than calling the holiday Pascha as everybody else had. Now, the interesting thing about this is actually still largely true to this day. What I mean by that is if you go to the Middle East, Russia, China, Greece, right? Anywhere that they're not predominantly dominated by English or Germanic speaking peoples, they actually still refer to this holiday as Pascha or some kind of a variant of it. Easter is something you'll typically only find in Western Europe and specifically countries that have Germanic languages like Germany, Norway, Ireland, or not Ireland, excuse me, England. Ireland does not have a Germanic language, and so on and so forth. Which is kind of an interesting thing if one were to think that this was derived from the name Ishtar, right? Why isn't the people who actually celebrated Ishtar and all the different things that she was supposed to do, why don't they actually call it Easter? They call it Pascha, as it was originally described as, right? The other interesting thing about this is that it's highly possible, I only got a minute, 40 seconds, it's actually highly possible that Bede the Venerable, accidentally made up the etymology of the word Easter. Now, it's not something he would have done on purpose. It's not like he was getting fault or he was purposely, maliciously trying to establish a false narrative. But it appears that Bede the Venerable was actually describing a month that accurately held that name, but was confused as to why it held that name and what the word Oster actually originally meant. You may notice that East is the first 4 letters of the word Easter. Well, they happen to derive from this self-same word. And just like Easter was supposed to be your rising, your cracking through, so to speak, right, which is also part of the egg imagery. We'll obviously get to that. East is where the sun comes from, right? So the sun rises in the east, sets in the west. And so the Anglo-Saxons, excuse me, Germanic peoples who would live there, and were actually speaking this Old English tongue, they would call East Easter, and the month where spring started, all different variants of this Ostern name, right? And you can see very clearly why that would be. The light coming forth in the form of resurrection is spiritual. The light coming forth in the form of the eastern direction is, of course, physical. And the light coming forth in the form of spring is kind of a metaphor for life actually springing out again every spring, right? But again, it's not only specific to these particular language groups, right? Those who are derived from Germanic, and therefore I would include English, right? But it's also something that it's possible Bede just didn't know what he was talking about. And one of the reasons we believe that, and I'll end right here because that's my timer, is there's no other references to Estar, excuse me. And we'll obviously have questions back and forth on that. I don't want to take too much of the time here, but I'm going to go ahead and get myself out of the solo layout. There we are.
Very good. Yeah, Bede, he's like one of the ones they hang themselves on as far as coming up with the I guess the dialects, going from the Oestar, Scandinavian, Norse, going into that, and then kind of incorporating the East, like you said, and then Easter. Whether it's, I mean, it's kind of a put together name. It comes from different areas, if you will. But it did change under Council of Nicaea, Constantine trying to bring in a lot of converts and things like that, saying, "Hey, yeah, you can have your your magic bunny that lays eggs, and it's okay because this is how it is." That's the kind of like the broad way to bring people to come to the church, I guess, or join the church. Would that be something you would think about?
So there's an interesting thing there because it is true that there was some syncretism going on in Europe, and right, especially at the hands of the Catholic Church. In fact, there is a very famous example of this in the form of Dia de los Muertos in Mexico, right? Mm-hmm. Where they kind of blended a bunch of folk culture from Mexico, as well as ancient Aztec paganism, as well as so-called Christian elements, right? And they kind of blended it all together, and now you have the holiday traditions of Dia de los Muertos. So I don't want to deny that that happened, because it certainly did. The thing about the Quartodeciman controversy, though, is that appears to have been an issue well before, not only that was established as a thing, which is even some years after Constantine, but even before Constantine was born, right? The Quartodeciman controversy we actually first find in the 2nd century, and the primary difference between the two parties seems to have been: do we celebrate on the Passover day because it's already an established and biblical holiday, or do we celebrate on the first Sunday of that Passover day, which may be the Passover day, may not, right? Kind of depends on the year, because that's the day of the week in which Jesus resurrected. And at the time, they didn't really want to fight too much about it. There's a bishop who probably wasn't actually going to be, in other words, history looks at him more powerfully than he actually is. His name's Victor, right? And Bishop Victor did actually try to say, no, the Quartodecimans, which actually celebrated it on the Passover day, they were out of line. And that was about the year 190, give or take. We're putting a little circa by that because we don't know exactly when he decided to say that. But he was very quickly rejected, even by people who were under his own diocese, which is kind of an anachronistic term, but people who he would be the shepherd of, you know what I mean? Like Irenaeus, for example. Irenaeus would write to him talking about, hey, like, don't you remember the earlier Christians? They were fine to let each party kind of do what they wanted to do without forcing their way on the other. And so it's true, just to recap what I'm saying, it's true that there is some syncretism that certainly went on more than we're comfortable with. That's absolutely a fact. But as it pertains to the Easter date, the Easter controversy predates any sort of syncretism by quite some time. And it was two different parties of Christians. One party wanting to honor the day of the week, and the other party wanting to honor the biblical holiday.
Right, and you also had the problem with Rome having to police a bunch of Christians that the word spread, after Jesus Christ, especially after Pentecost, that everything's just blessed with the Holy Spirit. Everybody's running around doing miracles left, right, and center. And then you have one of the top recruits as far as the Pharisees, who could have probably taken the top job and rode to Damascus. He gets knocked off his horse and sees a vision and becomes a gentleman that just couldn't be defeated in a. He even won in the court of law. He appealed to Caesar, talking about Paul or Saul. It's basically he appealed to Caesar when Agrippa would have let him go. He said, "Hey, everything's cool. Keep on. You're not causing any problems. We'll do this." But as it progressed, because you're only talking about not even the first century yet. You're still in the preemie of the first century, and then you're going into the actual revision of the first century to the second century, and then you had like you said, you mentioned Polycarp, Eusebius, and people like that were in and around writing histories. And then you had Josephus coming up with his writing under which it's kind of they just couldn't deny that there was a guy named Jesus running around doing some stuff and causing some problems in Jerusalem, and that's where everybody headed for their yearly journeys and things like that. You have the Feast of Tabernacles, you have the Feast of Passover, and then you have all these that they generally would go to Jerusalem for. And it became well known, especially in a Roman state, that they didn't want to deal with in the first place, right? So I mean, it's interesting.
And there is certainly a lot of interesting points with there. One of the more interesting points, just kind of as a side note, Sol Invictus. People often reference that Sol Invictus was December 25th, but interestingly enough, that was actually an attempt to co-opt the Christians because of precisely what you're talking about. So what had happened was the Emperor Aurelian, he wanted to try to stamp out Christianity, and he figured one of the best ways to do that would be to associate the holidays the Christians were celebrating with his own god, which was Solus, right, which is the Roman sun god. And so he took the already existing Christmas holiday and decided to put the birth of his god Sol Invictus on that same day. And so interestingly enough, it was kind of the opposite of what a lot of people think, right? Some people think it's Sol Invictus, therefore Christmas. Actually, the other way around. It's Christmas, therefore Sol Invictus, right? The Sol Invictus people, Sol Invictus, I guess you would say. It's Sol Invictists. That's a hard word to even say.
Right.
But
too much Latin going on.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, they were trying to copy the Christians there, and just an example kind of what you're talking about, right? Where it is like the Roman Empire certainly did have syncretic elements about it. But it often is in ways that we don't typically suspect in our modern day, right? Kind of like that one where it's them actually copying the Christians rather than the other way around. Or in the case of the Easter holiday, just making it a national day, right? Whereas before, it's been celebrated since the early first century, early second century. We don't know if it goes back to the first century. We just don't have the information quite yet. But we would assume, right, with people like Polycarp, that it probably did, considering that Polycarp is a pupil of John. But that's an assumption. So we'll kind of leave that to the side for a moment. But nonetheless, the fact that he turned that into a national holiday rather than just a holiday that was being celebrated religiously, that kind of co-ops Christianity in that way too, right? But it's not in the way we think. We think he's trying to force his paganism onto Christianity, but it's actually quite the opposite. He's trying to just get his hands on what already exists in Christianity, right? And that tends to be the case, I think, with a lot of these different things. A perfect example, actually, is the symbol I'm wearing, right? People think this star is a modern thing, right? But actually, this whole symbol here, with the menorah and the star and the fish underneath, is actually said to date all the way back to the first century with the original Jewish inhabitants of Jerusalem. Now, whether or not that's actually exactly. And then you can get the menorah out of the Bible, right? When he was setting up the lampstand. And so my point there is just to say, there's a lot of people, typically it's atheists, but a lot of times it's also people who have a very heavy anti-Catholic bent, which I don't have a problem with having an anti-Catholic bent. I'm not a Catholic. I'm just simply saying a lot of times in my experience, you find people in that side of history, that side of debate, sometimes making connections that become popularized later on. And then once we look back through these connections, we realize it's a lot of times the inverse of what they're talking about, namely the pagans trying to copy the Christians. And that's one thing real quickly I want to say important with the Easter, because the Easter name, right? Because people will often say, well, Easter is derived from Ishtar, right? But the thing is we don't have reference to the holiday being called Easter until the Venerable Bede, right? From the 8th century. Now, he's talking specifically about a group of German Christians, Anglo-Saxon to be more specific. And they're living in England at the time, right? And he's saying that they're calling the holiday Easter, and of course that's true, right? We're living proof of that because we still call it Easter to this day. But why is it that in that 800-year period of time, the holiday is not referred to as Easter, but it's referred to as Pascha? And even to this day, outside of the English-speaking world, the German-speaking world, and some other countries in Western Europe, it still tends to be referred to by Pascha or some variation of that, right? Like the Finnish version of Pascha, for example.
That is the question. That is a huge question on that, because the Pascha, it's just short, or it's easier to say that than Passover. But coming out of Exodus, that was late because you already had the Egyptian gods, you already had the Sumerian gods previous, you had the Babylonian gods, still in working, but they were already put together before the Passover even came to be, as far as given to Moses and the Exodus out of Egypt. So a lot of things, obviously the menorah, the tabernacle, the place of worship, God says, hey, don't do as the heathen do, basically. I've set you apart, and this is how I'm going to treat you guys. You stay in this and you won't get in trouble. And along the way, for 40 years dwelling in the desert, they got in a lot of trouble, because of not listening. And even Moses, he got a bit upset with them. They're stiff-necked people, is what God said. And Moses got angry, hit the rock instead of speaking to the rock. So it's an interesting thing with Moses not being able to see the promised land that he was technically promised, because even way back to Abraham, they gave that up, right? Abram, then Abraham, they gave that up. They lost the promised land, and now they're going back to the promised land. I mean, with I don't know, untold millions of people, at least 2 or something like that that left, because it left. Not only were the firstborn killed, but you also had the first of every single flock, right? So if there were cows, if there were sheep, if there were whatever, the firstborn of all the cattle died. The firstborn of all the that didn't have the blood over the door. And which basically makes a tau as well, which is a cross, sign of a cross. And the bottom line is they were decimated. But that was exactly what Pharaoh wanted to do to the Israelites, if you will. So God flipped the script and said, hey, Moses, today's going to be the first year of the month for you, or first month of the year for you. And on the 14th, you're going to sacrifice a lamb. On the 10th, you're going to gather all the little ewes, old enough to be eaten. So whether it's a 1 year or it's a 6 month old or whatever the age is that is, they can be eaten. And you're going to inspect it for 4 days for no blemishes, 0 blemishes. And then you're going to go from that to eating a lamb with your sandals on, ready to bolt and everything like that. As as nighttime comes, all those that don't have the blood that's over the door, those children are going to die, and especially the animals. And so you have basically not a lot left in Egypt as they came out. When they left, and then obviously Pharaoh changed his mind because he didn't get it his way, and now he has no real nation to carry through. He has to rebuild it, if you will, and he has no heir, so he's gonna have to get another heir, and so he's gonna go take it out on the Israelites that are traipsing through the desert and end up to the Red Sea, and I got you now, but then that kind of goes the wrong way. So it just carries on that in the 40 years, there's so many times that they just get so punished. It's just what they do. And that's kind of what we do today, right? We do this thing where, okay, Lord Jesus, will never do that again. And guess what? Straight on it, right? I said I wasn't going to do it again. I meant it. And, thank God we have prayer and we have redemption. And we don't have to sacrifice animals. Imagine if you had to go to the grocery store now and have to buy a whole lamb and eat the whole thing.
Right.
So anyway, it just falls into that where I don't want to be too long. I'll let you get back, but
well, and if I may, just to kind of to briefly ask, because I think the illustration, and of course, there's multiple points we'll have to cover, right? So I don't want to just pretend this is like a catch-all victory kind of thing. Right. But I've always thought this is, one of the stronger points for Easter actually being a legitimate Christian holiday rather than derived from anything pagan is it wasn't originally called Easter, right? And it's still only regionally called Easter to this day. And obviously, here's the thing. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like, oh, well, somebody doesn't have an answer, therefore I won. That's not how these things go, right? In reality, none of us knows everything. But I would just ask humbly for you to kind of like consider that, right? Like, why is this name? Because Pascha is derived from that Passover, right? It comes directly from the word Pesach. And that's what they originally called. It's kind of like Christmas, right? Christmas isn't originally what Christmas was called. They called it Nativity, right? Because that means birth. Nowadays we call it Christmas because of a whole long etymological thing. But there's a lot of different things you can even kind of think of Passover that way, right? We obviously don't call it Pesach anymore. We call it Passover. But nonetheless, I would present to you that the usage of a cognate version of Pesach for the name of Easter for the first roughly 800 years, probably closer to 700 years of the holiday's celebration. I would argue that that's probably pretty strong evidence that the holiday does originally have a Christian origin. And, if we want to just kind of leave it at a consideration there's a lot of other points we can cover, so I don't want to take on it too long, but just kind of a point for.
I mean, I do have an answer. It's not a catch-all answer. Is there some feedback on my line, or?
No, you're good. You're good.
Okay.
Also, real quick, that did remind me. I'm going to let you get your answer. I just want you to know when I turn my screen off, I just have dogs that scratch at my window constantly. So
nice.
I just let them in and out.
Dogs. All right. So basically, okay, the story of if it goes to basically what's the girl's name? Ostara. We'll just say that, right? We'll just say Ostara. Go with that. But it's a Teutonic name, Germanic, Nordic, right? Basically, it was a goddess of fertility that was worshipped in between. However, It could be also, I've looked up different things. It goes all the way to different names, whether it's it always seems to end up with Semiramis and Nimrod, because you also have Isis and Osiris, and you have it's always the mother and the child, mother and the child, mother and child. But the real Easter thing about the bunnies with the eggs, the story about the bird that was injured, the star revives it and turns it into a hare, and then the hare, out of thankfulness, starts laying eggs for her. Well, if you go back to Moloch, okay, what do they do with Moloch? They sacrifice their children, and most of the time it was little ones, which came at a certain time, which was, you had your winter solstice, which was another debauchery, fertility type of a thing, because it was getting colder, everybody's huddled up and this and that. But then you have the spring, where a lot of the rejuvenation, you got the fertility thing going. So there were babies being born, but the ones that were born, they were then sacrificed to Moloch, Baal Peor, whatever, that they had trouble with under, that was the stumbling block that Balaam put in front of them. And so anyway, the rabbit, which is a hare in the story, starts laying these eggs, multicolored eggs, by the way. But the ones that were important were the red eggs. Where the red eggs come from? So this is where they put their children through the fire, is what's mentioned in the Bible. I have it on I can get to it a little bit on the PowerPoint. But the fact is that the bodies that were dismembered before they were thrown in, or they're thrown in together, there was blood, they would take these eggs, and then they would dye the eggs in the blood, which would be red eggs. So even today, this is truth, you can look it up, the commensurate egg for the White House is a red egg. And the commensurate egg for Easter at the Vatican is a red egg. So that's where I start. Like, that's a bit too much of a coincidence right there. But I know red's a bright color, but knowing full well what they did, because they found the writings, the cuneiform and everything, about how they, brought their children to Moloch to be sacrificed, okay, for the harvest, right? Mm-hmm. Well, we're gonna have a great harvest, so we got to sacrifice, these kids. Tell you what, they must have been really fertile back in the day. I got to tell you, because you can't just give away a kid a year, right? It's got to be
right, no kidding,
going on. So, I mean, we even know that because that's what, God has warned them against. And then you have the crying and weeping for Tammuz, all kind of ventured up. So some, okay, let's say it's mythology, it's flat. They still had to come up with a story somewhere. Even Grimm's fairy tales are based on some truth. Right. Jacob Grimm even admitted it in his writings. Hey, there was some Wicca out there that we used to spy on. They were dancing around doing some stuff. And he admits, because they were naked. It had nothing to do with their evil doings. They went out there to go pervert some naked women. Mm-hmm. They would hide behind there and make up these old fairy tales because they're out there in the woods. So behind every fallacy, there's a little bit of truth. So that's my answer to Easter. So even though it wasn't called Easter, like you say, it is hard to find anything that says Easter up until after the AD started, right? So no matter if it's 100 AD, 200 AD, 300 AD, it doesn't really begin until after that, with the actual Easter coming in, right? It's always hidden behind some goddess, whether it's Artemis or it's, something, whatever the Greek or the Roman or the Greco-Roman god that they, like an Adonis or a Dionysus or a Narcissus or whoever it may be, that they're celebrating a pagan worship to. It generally revolves around death and fertility. So rejuvenation, if you will. It's very complicated because we weren't there, right? I wasn't there, but we can go off some history, but we don't have all the history of the volume. Like we can go on to, Encyclopedia Britannica now, which has everything pretty much from the mid 1800s, right?
Mhm.
Not, it gets a bit foggy after that, going earlier. But right now, I mean, we can find out, just like the viral Will Smith slap on Chris Rock. I mean, dang, how many seconds did that take to get online?
Yeah,
What,
no
one?
kidding. It was literally instantly.
Instantly. So, we don't have to go from a city or a place and then spread the knowledge. Paul, 15 years of journey, right? On ships, on boats, and whatever else he had to go on, skateboard or whatever he had, right? He traveled city to city, meeting people along the way. I mean, the trip from apparently from Jerusalem to Samaria is not a short trip, and you had to walk. They had roads. That's where they got the poll tax and the toll tax and all that other stuff. But it was a 3-day, 4-day journey to most places, back then. So could you imagine, it's not like, hey, I can get I can order online at Amazon and I get it tomorrow.
Right.
That's just not going to happen back then. So it was a slow roll because we're talking centuries. We're not just talking like just in the last 100 years is a blur to us with history. We've had, 2 world wars, heading towards a third. We've had a revolutionary war, just 300 years ago. We've had civil war just, a couple hundred years ago. We've had this, we've had that, and the world has changed. So could you imagine taking this technology and popping it back in the first century? Just go online for 5 seconds. You'll find what you need. Whether there's some truth to it or it's all lie, there's got to be something fixed in it where you can just chuck out the bad stuff, right? But you're still going to be left with the half truth mixed in with a little bit of sprinkled sugar and whatever is nice, and bring it in, because we do live, and we do battle against principalities and powers. It's not against men and women, it's principalities and powers, of the air. So it's, flesh and blood is not what we're after. It's, we're basically trying to take out these principalities and powers, and that's where Jesus Christ comes in. We couldn't do it on our own. An empty vessel is going to be filled. So if we're filled with the Holy Spirit, with Jesus Christ, through Jesus Christ, we're going to be filled, and there's no demon that's going to be able to touch us, right? We'll have that discernment to say, hey, this is a bad idea. I think I'm going to take off. You get that sixth sense, right? Come on, don't tell me you don't.
Well, and so there's there's some things that I can agree with for sure, and some things that obviously I want to push on. So one thing I will say in agreement is just that, when it comes to the tradition of egg dyeing is super old, like way before the establishment of any Easter holiday. In fact, even before the establishment of Passover, we have things from, we have painted eggs from like 2000 BC. So that there's a whole bunch of truth to people, when people say that the egg decorating is a very old and, abiblical, meaning outside of the Bible, tradition. Certainly true. There's no argument there. Now, it gets a little dicey when you talk about the Easter egg, only because, so let me first explain a little principle, and then I'll explain the only because, right? Then the principle is there are certain things that are easy enough to come up with that they end up being kind of rediscovered multiple times, right? Perfect example of this, you've probably seen the Celtic Swirl, right? That little circle there. It's very popular amongst Irish folks.
The never-ending knot.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the Celts did come up with that, which hence the reason that people call it the Celtic Swirl. But if anybody's familiar with the show Avatar, then you've probably seen a Chinese version of that. And the Chinese and the Celts never talked to each other, you know what I mean? They independently came up with it, and it's because if you think about it, it's a pretty easy thing to just, oh, there you go, now I have it, you know what I mean? And so it gets rediscovered multiple times. Another really funny example of that actually is what we would call the swastika. Now, Hitler himself actually took it from a already existing swastika, which is why his looks identical to the Hindu one. But you can take that and the Sicilian legs, which is the sort of 3-pronged, like it's one leg, right? It's a very creepy looking thing, in my personal opinion, but nonetheless, the Sicilians came up with that completely independent of the Hindus coming up with the swastika, even though the two things look almost identical, right? And then you have even another version of that in the form of the Greeks coming up with, I can't remember what the Greeks call it, but it's another one that looks very similar. Completely different meanings, completely different relations, you know what I mean? And you can kind of just go down the line with a lot of these things. And so when it comes to egg decorating, you find something kind of similar, right? Where it's, well, eggs are white and decorating is just a thing that people like to do. Humans are naturally creative and artistic. And so independently, you have different groups of people who start doing this tradition of egg decorating. And what we end up seeing in the case of the Easter egg is it appears to have originally come out of Persian Christians in Iran, sometime around the 500s, 600s. And they would paint a also red, but the red to symbolize the crucifixion because of his blood, egg with a golden cross on it. And that would typically be just like a symbol that they would have whenever they would celebrate the Passover, right? Because remember, over in the Greek one, like the Persians and the other Middle Eastern groups, they celebrate, or not celebrate, they worship, excuse me, in the Eastern Orthodox fashion. And it's been like that for quite some time, thousands of years, in fact. Well, little over 1,000. The Orthodox Church itself really is established in 1054 with the Great Schism, but it goes back to the 800s that they've been worshiping in this manner. But nonetheless, you can kind of see how, you know, these are people who are kind of celebrating in that old, what we would today call Orthodox fashion. Orthodox meaning the Orthodox Church, not Orthodox meaning the actual dictionary definition of it, right? And it's, you know, you can kind of see the formation of this independent tradition that is, you know, it's very similar to something that's been happening for thousands of years at this point, but is also coming up independently just simply because of the fact that, you know, it's a white thing that you can color, right? It's kind of like independently people have discovered paper, right?
Unless it's a Rhode Island red hen, they lay brown eggs.
I guess that's true, right? That is true.
And blue bird raised blue eggs. And, you know, it's just one of those. Let me step in real quick.
Yeah, for sure.
So, you know that there is a Persian, Iraq, Iran, you know, Persian, Iraq, Iran. Basically, they were all under one, you know, whether it's Assyrian, Sumerian, or Babylonian, they're all conquered at one time. They're all fighting against each other for numerous, you know, hundreds of years, right? Who's going to take this over? And then, you know, the big thing was our gods are bigger than your gods. Well, you mentioned Persian Christians. Okay, I get that. But Persia was also had its own little pagan problem there. You know, because you still had idol worship, which we still do now. I mean, it's a little bit more covered over. Nobody's walking around with a big obelisk off their head or anything like that. You know, it's pretty much a you know, out in the open then, because you were chastised, just like, you know, in certain areas of you know, the world, if you go in as a Christian to an Arab nation or vice versa, Arab you know, an Arab into a Christian nation, you know, it's kind of an uneasy feeling, right? So that since you brought up the Persian, which I actually rebuffed on that a couple of days ago, that Persia does have their own little goddess under the Persian side of it. Not too far away ago, you know, it's not in the early BC 2000 type thing, because that was all taken care of by the Sumerians or the Assyrians or the Accods and all them, you know, bolstering around. And then you had later on, once those nations fell to the Roman Empire was open to everything as long as you didn't upset the, you know, the apple cart, right? And that's what happened. So they allowed different things in different, you know, open bathhouses, you know, things along that way that, you know, obviously we have them today. We call them red light districts. You're not going to have one, you know, inside a mall, you know, where kids are going to be running around, but just down the street from me here, you can probably hit up, you know, 19 massage parlors, you know, just walking. So it's kind of like that, right? it's very accessible. And when you said Persians, it brought that thought back to me, because I really wasn't going to bring that up. I was just going to talk about the Oestra transformation, as far as the people of the continent spread out and spread whatever they brought with them, to them, and assimilated gods or threw away gods and changed sides with gods, the good ones and the bad ones. Certainly, it's where gremlins come from and all that fun stuff. It's very interesting when you start getting into, like I mentioned, you can't just take an airplane, and land in Persia back in the day. Now you can, right? So it makes it a lot more difficult that way. Yeah. So as far as the assimilation of the synchronism that went on in order to bring in worshipers and to hold them off, no let's see, Christian sect is without their own problems. Okay, Quakers, as well as those extremists, if you will, as far as the which I'm not against, but the oh, goodness gracious, how come I can't remember? With the ones that don't have any machinery, they the Amish. Thank you, the Amish. I mean, these people are very strict. You can't do this. They don't even have electricity in their houses still today. It was great going to Pennsylvania, going through the Amish land, and they have candles in the windows, and you can see the candles lit. There's no electricity in there, but they make great cheese, great, this, that, blankets, and everything like that, which is fantastic. But going back to assimilation, the Catholic Church, especially, there were several different times, and I get it. Constantine was very anti-Hebrew, because they crucified, their savior, right? Their Messiah. They crucified their Messiah, and oops, oy vey, we didn't see it coming. Oh yeah, well, you forgot Isaiah, you forgot Psalms, you forgot all that, but that was how that worked out, because they themselves were not keeping up with the laws, and that's how Jesus Christ was able to correct them a lot of times. White sepulchres and this and that, because you blow all the trumpets when you drop some money into the bucket, but you're not doing it for the people. You're doing it for your own little, so you can broaden your borders and look all clean, and inward you're basically just vile. So that's the outer appearance versus the inner appearance of the Easter egg. I don't know how eggs have anything to do other than for eating and much, unless you want to do a Fabergé egg that's worth a couple $1 million. But
so it is interesting. There's a couple things as far as I don't mean to cut you off. Sorry. I just want.
No, you're fine.
I appreciate you. So with the egg thing, there's a couple things that cause it to be the thing that is chosen by the Persians. The first one I've actually already hinted to, which is its white nature. It makes it easier to draw on. You know what I mean? And what's interesting in this particular regard is humans don't tend to be very unique in the way we decorate things as cultures. So, for example, you've probably seen people decorate with some kind of a fruit of some kind. Usually a gourd kind of fruit, like a pumpkin or a squash or something like that, right? Almost every culture in the world that has fruits decorates their homes with fruits, and it's because they're colorful. And sometimes you can carve into them because they're easy to carve and stuff like that. And that's why you got, jack-o'-lanterns on one side of the world, but then you also have little golden pomegranates around the priest's garment in another part of the world, or people wearing hats with bananas and other berries and stuff like that in another part of the world. You know what I mean? And the point there is just to say that a lot of times when it comes to our decoration, and our artistic expression, we do a lot of the same things independently of each other, right? And this kind of brings me to a side point that I'll have to mention before my second, which is just simply to say, we do have a issue when it comes to some of these customs where, the custom itself may have been part of a pagan festival or pagan worship or pagan way of doing things, but there's nothing inherently wrong with the custom itself, and so therefore it's not like there's actually issue with Christians doing it. And I'll give a brief example of that, because I know when I say that, people probably are taken aback, like, well, what do you mean? How is it that a pagan custom can be fine for a Christian to observe? And just to give you a brief example, well, it's a pagan custom to have a banquet, isn't it? In fact, the Greeks, when describing feasts, originally that what they meant to describe was the Persians getting together for the king and feasting at his banquet table, right? And that was back well before they were Christian. That was back when the Persians would have been Zoroastrian in nature, right? So certainly not believers at that point in time. And obviously, feasts are not pagan, right? There's nothing wrong with us having a potluck after church or a birthday celebration or taking the wife out to dinner or something along those lines, right? There's nothing wrong with celebrating with food. In fact, you even find it in the Bible all the time, right? With these holidays like Passover, Sukkot, and so on and so forth. However, it is still something that you very often see in some of these other pagan cultures, right? And that's the obvious and kind of quintessential example, therefore. But what about an example that's a lot less obvious, but we can still kind of see, how it doesn't, how the practice itself is harmless, and not something that would be shied away from, right? There is custom that you'll find in basically every culture in the world, but let's go ahead and stick with the Maori for now. Maori are the New Zealand people, right? Where they would dance before going to war, right? And everybody's probably seen this dance by now, which is why I picked them. But it's that whole, they slap their legs and they scream out with their native tongue, saying some stuff I don't understand for sure. But and they're beating their chests and they're moving around, and it looks like a lot like a football team almost, when the football team's kind of like shoulder to shoulder and they're all jumping around and hoo ha and all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? And that is totally based in Maori paganism, 100%, right? They're trying to get their spirits up and call on their ancestors and go into a frenzied rage and all that. And so it's like a clear as day pagan practice, right? But the New Zealand rugby team in the modern day does that, right? Before their sports game.
Yeah, it's called the haka.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
It just means we're gonna beat you on the field of play. It's
see, and there's my point right there.
Right.
You just real. Oh, sorry, I'll be very brief, but I just want to, because you just kind of made my point right there. Is the New Zealand rugby team doing that? They're not doing anything pagan, right? They're simply saying we're gonna beat you guys down, and we got a little bit of a brotherhood like other sports teams do, right? But the dance they're doing is totally originally a pagan thing. You know what I mean? So we also kind of have to be careful sometimes of saying, just because a custom was pagan, does that mean it's an irredeemable custom? Now, of course, some of them are. Like, for example, praying to a statue will never be okay. Under any interpretation of Christianity, will praying to a statue be okay? What would you call that?
What?
Shoot, I'm
veneration?
Drawing a blank.
Veneration of a statue? So you're talking about kneeling to a statue?
Well, no, because there's another one I'm trying to think of. It's Dia de los Muertos does it. The altar, right? When they build the altar and they put right. That's not okay under any interpretation of Christianity, right?
But God forbids it in Leviticus, Numbers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But certain things, though,
gods before Him.
Yeah, 100%, right? But certain things like the feasting and some dances, or the idea of a certain dessert or something like that. Those things are not necessarily, even if they start with pagan practice, are not necessarily something that you can't do as a Christian, so long as that paganism is removed, right? And so I think that's another important thing. Go ahead, though, because I've been going on.
I watched a little bit of your Purim thing, and I'm surprised you didn't bring up that Esther is close to Easter. From Purim.
Well,
Yeah,
So
but
that's
so she had a feast. Was that wrong of her to have a feast and to marry? Because if it wasn't for if it wasn't for her marrying the king, Israel would have just disappeared. That was the whole thing with Purim.
very true. And by the way, it is interesting that you bring up Easter does sound a lot like Esther, because it is possible that um, they mean the same thing. Nobody's really 100% sure, and I am on the side of the camp that says no, just so people can get my own
Yeah, me too.
presupposition out of the way. Um, but there are some who have suggested that the word Esther may actually be a cognate of the original Oster, and have a reference to shining forth of light. I think it's actually much interestingly enough, kind of ironically, I think it's actually more closely related to Ishtar. Um, and I think that's intensely fascinating because it means that her given Persian name, because of course her Hebrew name was Hadassah, but it would mean her given Persian name was actually
Correct.
a
She
theophoric
hid
name.
her right. She hid her name so that she wouldn't be found out to be a Jew,
Yeah,
or
exactly.
at that time a Hebrew Israelite.
Mm-hmm.
Because of Haman. Correct. I think it was the last of the was it Amorites? Amorites that Saul was supposed to get rid of. Saul sat back and said, no, we'll take all the stuff. And yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, descendants of Agag. That's 100% right.
that's exactly right.
Um,
Hey,
and
let
go
me
ahead.
know when you have time for me just to flip through some of the little slides I got later. Let's finish this up and then
Yeah,
see
for
what
sure.
everybody's doing.
So we've so I want to get one thing real briefly before we do that, and then the other thing, because there's a second thing I want to get to, but we'll get to the second thing after the slides. But so we've talked about the name, we've talked about the egg. I wanted to talk about the egg hunt briefly while we're there. Um, from my understanding, the earliest reference to an Easter egg hunt I can find is actually Martin Luther, who organized it. And by the way, that's a common theme in our holidays. Martin Luther had a whole bunch of influence on the way we celebrate both Easter and Christmas. But nonetheless, the idea of the Osterhare, which is the German original version of the Easter bunny, the idea of the Osterhare doesn't come until after the Easter egg hunt has already been established by Martin Luther, and the idea of the Osterhare bringing the eggs comes even later than that. Um, so I guess I just want to know real briefly, do you have a reference that is older than the Martin Luther one that potentially has, because that's as far as I can trace the practice back is to
Yes.
Martin Luther.
Yeah. It's all kind of weird because right after say the 200s, a lot of things, especially the Roman roads were all finished. You had a lot of empires that were under the Roman. They lasted for a couple hundred more years, and then they got squashed. But the Vandals came in and everything. But the highways were open. The seaways were a lot better under Roman rule, if you will, because they ruled with an iron fist, if you will, even though they're the iron the iron legs, the bottom legs.
Mm.
So they ruled with that, and they as long as you didn't rock their boat, spill the apple cart, everything was cool with the Romans because they wanted to assimilate, and that's kind of what that synchronized. That you could worship anything you wanted. They didn't care that Jesus Christ was Jesus Christ, the Messiah. They really didn't. Pilate had nothing to do with it. He was just more curious than anything. He went at him with the Socratic thing. Hey, who is it they say you are? This and that and the other thing. He didn't want to put him to death. He was like, oh man, I just want to go back to what I was doing the day before, whatever I was doing. But it was the Sanhedrin that pushed him politically, right? Because all he needed was one more upheaval and he would have been done. Whether they behead you or whatever it was, he would have been gone. And if you failed as a historian, a leader, whatever, it was generally death, that the Romans handled that with, and they just moved somebody else up. So you have to look at that side of it. Whereas, they were friendly until kind of like that boss. I don't know if you've had one. You're pretty young. I've had plenty of bosses where they're very quiet. It's like everything, but they let things add up. And it's kind of like, they have the business meeting, once every quarter or whatever it is. And all of a sudden he just lashes out. And about 3 people get their heads chopped off and they're gone, out of the business. They're just giving their pink slip right then and there. It's happened to me, not to me personally, but I've seen it several times. Just what? I had no idea. I thought the guy was really cool. But that's how the Romans, they gave you enough rope to hang yourself within their boundaries. And that's how the perfect time for Jesus Christ to come along. He couldn't have done it under Babylon. Mary would have been killed first of all, taken away from Joseph or whatever it was. That was the perfect time because of the changeover had already been 200 years from Greece, thereabouts 250 years from Greece. And so you're looking at 0 date, and now you're coming into the beginning of the 1st century. You're only a quarter in, and you got this guy running around healing people. I don't think it was that big of a deal to Rome itself. Like, I don't think it ever went to the emperor and said, hey, we just got word in Jerusalem. There's this dude running around. He's kind of healing people. What's the emperor going to say to that? Oh, but he's causing some trouble with the religious guys. But the only reason the Romans stayed away from the Sanhedrin and the Pharisees and the Sadducees and all that political boundary was because of the Seleucids, what happened with the Maccabees 400 years before. Or was it? No, 300 years before, I guess that. And so they didn't want that upheaval because it's kind of like, hell hath no fury of a woman scorned. Well, it'll be the same thing with every time something's gone wrong with any of the Israelites or Jews or whatever it may be that they come fighting, to the last, and they're fighting over whatever. I mean, so many battles were won under Saul. Before that, you had under Moses and under Joshua, they had some help with an angel one time. Only 185,000, no big deal. But that was an immense army that came up against them that changed the whole atmosphere of the promised land. And Rome wasn't really into that. Rome was a passive leader unless you really, came across where you're just, you're sabotaging what we've got going on. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So would it be safe to say then that we don't have an earlier reference than the Martin Luther one? However, you do. Let me see because I want to word this in a.
You talking about the egg thing, or you just talking about the?
Well, so and I want to make sure because I want to represent you fairly. Yeah. Is it fair to say that we don't have earlier reference than Martin Luther's egg hunt, but you have later reference which you believe accurately provides earlier reference, which is fair, by the way. You don't necessarily have to have the earliest.
There's especially in the later Babylonian and the earlier Assyrian, so there's kind of like a transfer there of the egg hunt, if you will. And it was involving the children, but that was part of the if they didn't catch enough eggs, they went to the fire. So it was more not a game, if you will. They thought it was a game. So I guess up until age 10, they were sending kids into the fire. So it's like, they have these little tablets. I mentioned that to you before. I've got a picture of one. I mean, literally, it's that big. And it's like a whole letter of cuneiform writing in, Sumerian. And it tells about we're sending, that one was like a shopping list. And the other one's like a letter to, family member. And another one's a letter for they didn't have newspapers back there. They had probably a town crier or something like most of the, medieval places had, where they would come out and read what's going on, from the whatever the center of the city steps. So that necessarily didn't need to be written down. But as far as the writings for the Mesopotamian area. Yeah, Greece. I'm not sure they got into the whole hiding Easter egg stuff thing. They're, Macedonia with Alexander the Great was more interested in, taking everything going and just expanding. He tried against India, but the elephants kind of stopped him. The elephant in the room, if you will.
We got about 12 minutes on the open discussion, so I want to go ahead and let you get to your slides here. But we've covered so far the name, the Easter egg hunt. We'll get on the slides here, and then if we can, at the end.
We forgot the maypole too.
Well, yeah, and I want to talk about the bunny as well, but obviously we'll see if we can fit that in. Let's go ahead and
press share screen.
Nicholas says he can't choose a yes or no for the survey because there are two distinct and incompatible Easters. Well, I guess I could have added a third category, but I did not. That was perhaps my bad. I apologize. I wonder if I can edit it. I'm not actually sure. This is the first time I've ever put a poll in the live chat, to be honest with you. I literally just noticed that I could do it. And so I was like, hey, you know what? I'm sure this is probably like 50-50 as far as the people who watch me. So let's throw it in. Let's see what happens. But
let's do it. We're doing all right. Keeping up with it.
Absolutely. So let me know when you got the
found it.
By the way, Jono asked if you were my father. No relation.
No relation. Oh, we're related, bro. It only came out of one country. That's the British Isles, mostly Scotland, a little bit of Ireland.
I guess that's true, right? I guess if you go far enough back,
my beard comes in red. It's crazy. I got older and it has a little bit more gray in it, but yeah, my hair comes in red. So
for sure.
Where'd it go? Ah, here it is. There you go. Uploading.
Let's see.
Processing.
Yeah, I cannot edit it. So I guess cannot have a both answer. I apologize, Brother Nick. Looks like so far got 6 votes in. I might give the results at the end of it.
All right.
But nonetheless.
There we go. All right. So basically, is Easter Jesus Christ Resurrection Day or a counterfeit? My hint is it's a counterfeit. That's where I was going with this in the beginning, but it's kind of backed off that. So, you have several different encyclopedias with Bibles and good things like that. So Easter was originally a pagan festival honoring Esther. It's a Teutonic Germanic goddess of the night and spring, yada, yada, yada. The vernal equinox and all that fun stuff. And then you have same thing here. Same International Standard Bible Encyclopedia. English word comes from an Anglo-Saxon, Estra, Teutonic goddess. Sacrifice was offered in April, so the name was transferred. Then you got the word Easter. This is from the Unger's Bible Dictionary. So these are pretty simple. I mean, it's, coming from a Bible dictionary, obviously it's not the word of God, but this is where they're coming up with their things, Anglo-Saxon, Germanic, which was all kind of mixed around, between the split up of the Roman Empire. So long time ago, after Noah's sons left the ark, Genesis chapter 10 has the list of nations. And somewhere out of that, you had Nimrod, who was the son of Ham, grandson of Cush, and the great-grandson of Noah. AKA Nimrod. At least he has about 50 different names. So just kind of put down that. And then you have, he's also Sargon of Akkad, by the way. And then you have Semiramis up here, which is more of a earlier translation of the name, but she's actually the the one you'll see in the next slide. But Tammuz, this is the one I mentioned before. This is one who got eaten by a boar when he was about 40 years old. That's why we have 40 days of Lent. That's why we have the eat the ham on Easter, and because getting back at the wild boar that ate the reincarnation of Nimrod, if you will. Nimrod had many different names. So you have the moon goddess. So this is where Semiramis kind of comes in as the I guess it's a pseudo, not really Greco-Roman, but more of a Turkish, if you will. I guess it would be in that area of Greece. So you have Ishtar, they have Isis. These are all moon goddesses. Bringing into that. So First Kings says, for Solomon went after Asheroth. Asheroth is also another name for the Semiramis or the Astarte or the Ishtar. That, if you just Google it, put in both names, it will show you somebody came up with something. So Ashtaroth is what's called in First Kings, and the goddess of the Sidonians, which is Sidon, and after Milcom and the detestable idol of the Ammonites. And Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and did not follow the Lord fully as David, his father, had done. So basically, he's putting the account that Solomon had, I forget how many wives now, but he had numerous ones, and he kind of went off the beaten path. Had a couple sons, and it didn't last all that long until Babylon came and took them away. Assyria first in the north, and then the south was taken away by Babylon with Nebuchadnezzar. The name of Easter. So basically the wish upon, why I wish, O stars, what they would say. And these are all Babylonian. And so if you look at the Estra, nothing different. She's waving the little, leaves, if you will. And, that's it's just a progression, if you will. So like I mentioned, as populations moved across and things like that, there was a lot of intermingling of religions. Pretty much the same how the message of Jesus Christ exploded after the first century. I could go into this, but this is basically another thing where you have them doing their Easter thing on the left, and over here you have the mother and the child. Whether you want to call it the reincarnation of Nimrod or you just want to call it Tammuz, it's both the same thing. So Jeremiah, do you not see what they do in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem? The children gather wood, the fathers kindle the fire, and the women knead the dough to make cakes for the Queen of Heaven. That's what Semiramis is known, Astarte, and all the others, Queen of Heaven. And they pour out drink offerings to other gods, and they provoke me. There's your hot cross buns. There's your cakes. That's where hot cross buns came from, because they even found them carved in the walls there in Babylon, Samaria, places like that. So you have these little cakes, and that was the food service or the replenishment after all the sex they had. If you want to go with that. And this is what ended up 3 months later. You have the gentleman here handing his baby to Moloch, passing through the fire. But that's not what it means to me. That's generally what people say about, the Easter thing. That's not what it means to me. So anytime, you're dealing with Easter eggs, dyeing them in the Easter egg hunts, you're preparing the ancient pagan culture, dealt with blood sacrifice and the worship of Mother Goddess. So that's pretty much and this is the breakdown of the, the sun god, basically what country it was, whether it's Babylon, Egypt, Greece, Rome, Nordic, or if you wanted to get into the Luciferian, or if you want to get into the Roman, they're all pretty much the same peoples. So if you have, you want to find out who basically they were going after the moon goddess because they were pretty much all moon goddesses, mother god, because the sun god had to be a man, right? So, you start with, Semiramis, then you go to Isis, and then you go to Artemis, and then you go to Diana. You had Greece, and then you had Rome, the Greco-Roman. Most of it was Diana. Diana was mostly in Ephesus, kind of with the Ephesians. You have the Nordic, which I've never heard of Jord, but I think it's Jord. Kind of like with Odin and all that. So this is kind of a breakdown of basically the transference into which country. It's the same God. It's the same thing that's been for however many years that they started it. I'm not going to get into this one right here. Here's your little picture again, with the the fertility queen of heaven. But that's not what Easter means to me, And here you go again. You have Aphrodite, Adonis, which is Semiramis and Nimrod all the way through. It's just Isis and Osiris and Aphrodite and Adonis, and then Venus and Cupid. They're all the same. Cupid is basically Harpocrates. I don't know if you know who that is, but that's why Oprah Winfrey's, it's not reverse Oprah, it's Harpo for short for Harpocrates. If you do a quick little search, find out who Harpocrates is. Constantine, 325 AD, you already mentioned that, but this was basically where he dedicates Sunday, which is the practice in Rome, and that's when it became illegal for a lot of Sabbaths to happen for the Hebrews, 325. They were totally anti-Hebrew. You killed the next Tammuz, and, we're not happy about that. And so kind of went that. So basically keep my requirements, do not follow any of the detestable customs that were practiced before you came, and do not defile yourselves with them. I am the Lord your God. Leviticus 18:30. Then you go, shall not worship the Lord your God in that way. For every abomination to the Lord which he hates, they have done to their gods, for they burn even their sons and daughters in the fire of their gods. Talking about Moloch. So basically I can go on with this. Barna Group did this thing. The problem facing the Christian church is not that people lack the complete set of beliefs. The problem is that they have a full slate of beliefs in mind, which they think are consistent with biblical teachings, and they are neither open to being proven wrong, nor are they learning new insights. And that's basically what this is about. I'm not saying, hey, don't glorify the Lord Jesus Christ's resurrection. Okay. I'm saying that maybe we shouldn't go spend a whole bunch of money wherever store it is to go buy some pink eggs and that, and have the children run around, which is a fun thing, but maybe it doesn't need to be so harsh for the kids. This one's a little bit hard to read, but it just goes on about the what Socrates had to say about the events. So basically,
to be clear, Socrates, Scholasticas, right? The church historian.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, not the actual Socrates. You're exactly right.
For sure.
So, so he was basically, just talking about the Feast of Easter began everywhere more of a custom than by any commandment, either of Christ or the apostles. So that's, it's in the Ecclesiast, basically as a thing. So Easter just kind of filled in the gap, I guess you could say, because it was a ride along, but because of the way the Jewish calendar is, and then the way that the regular solar calendar is, and all that, with the at that time it would have been the Julian calendar that was going on until they got to the Gregorian. But the Julian calendar, they fixed it because of the extra day or whatever the problem was with leap year. And you have the, whereas, like I mentioned before, that the Hebrew year, 038, 19 of them, that you have to add a whole extra month just to make it correct. So therefore, you can have Passover in early March or late April, just depending on when that year. Like I said, this year for 2022 is very similar to 2000, where we have all three of the feast back to back versus, Feast of First Fruits would be later on. This is a little collage that was picked offline that shows the Easter bunny with the little eggs under there, and then it goes from Semiramis to Ishtar, which doesn't, I'm not going off that. That's what I tried to tell you last time we were talking about. It's not because her name is Ishtar that it's Easter. It's it can be called blah blah day. It's just who's worshiping at what. Now this is the clincher, and then I'll stop after this. Can you see that?
Yeah.
We can.
Okay.
All right. So basically, this is the very beginning new day of the Hebrew calendar. These are the feast days. So if you look at what day it would have been back in the time of Jesus Christ's day, you can pick out that it had to be a Wednesday that he was crucified. So therefore, you have back to back, you have the two Sabbaths, and then you have the first fruits on that Sunday. Okay, but that Sunday would not be coincided like it is this year. Okay, so you have the Friday and the Sunday. Basically, they're calling it Easter on Good Friday. Then you have the Easter. It's probably Wednesday. And this is actually done by the Air Force in Colorado. I can get you the link to that. I just cropped it and put it on there. I have the link to it, so you can do this with any date. You can take it back, and they actually adjusted the 2 hours for Israel time versus the Greenwich time, because there's a 2 hour difference in that. So if you look at the way that the first fruits day would have fallen, that would have been the day that Jesus Christ rose from the grave. Okay. If you look at the beginning of unleavened bread, which would have been the following day, and then you had Saturday, right? So he was in the ground on Saturday, whether it was Friday or whatever, Saturday, which was another Sabbath. They had 4 back-to-back Sabbaths. They just counted those Saturday as a regular Sabbath, right? Because that was the day they celebrated their their Sabbath, regular Sabbath. So I'll go ahead and I'll unshare. Just take it down.
All right. So I'll go ahead and give a couple brief responses here, and then we're out of discussion time, so we'll go straight to the questions after that.
Right ahead.
I won't respond too much to the last thing, only because my understanding of the calendar is a little bit different. The sources that I have say that
that makes sense.
Gives a little bit different dates. But that's obviously kind of a conversation for another time. Obviously, we'd both agree he's crucified on the Passover day in April, all that kind of stuff. So I'll just kind of set that aside for a brief moment. So there's a couple things, and I do apologize. My dogs are going a little bit nuts.
Yeah, that's all right. That's what they do. Let them go at it.
Right?
Not bothering me one bit.
And I appreciate that. So the first thing that I do want to mention is, we kind of saw earlier there was some of the stuff about the name Easter and its association with, the Ostare, or however you actually say her name, right?
Yeah.
And I got to remind everybody about there's two real kind of major issues with that. And that, number one, we have the problem of the holiday's original name actually being Pascha, and still in most other places still being Pascha, right? And the association with the name Easter being a both more modern in the grand scheme of things, as well as Germanic language centric, meaning English, Nordic, German, etc. kind of thing, right? Whereas in other countries, they don't tend to call it that. They still tend to call it typically Pascha, Pascha, or some kind of variant. And some holidays, like for example, Polish does call it like Great Night or something like that. And I don't know how exactly you say that in Polish, but nonetheless, it's
well, you have to be in Poland or say it in Polish.
Yeah, for sure. No kidding. But you know what I mean? So it's one of those things where it's like, it is true that there is a possible, and I want to emphasize possible here because I'll get to this in a moment, but we don't know if Ostare actually existed, right? As far as the worship of her. Correct. Obviously the goddess didn't exist, right? But, it is important for us to note, though, that was a later attaching of that in a regional location or in a regional location, right? In a very specific region. Regional location is a redundancy.
Right.
But nonetheless, you know what I mean? An
Yep.
attachment to an already existing Christian holiday, which we see as Pascha. And Pascha and Easter, it is important to remember they are the same thing, right? It's not two different names for different holidays. It's just we call what the Greeks call Pascha Easter. We're celebrating the same thing, and a lot of times on the same days.
So you're calling Easter Passover. Is that what you're saying?
No. It's derived from that. But you got to remember, Pascha is not actually the same as Passover, even though the name does come from Pesach, right?
Yeah. Well, if you go,
because the holiday of Easter is derived from Passover, right? At least in my construction, right?
Right.
Because you have the crucifixion on the Passover day, the resurrection on the first fruits, and then obviously, since I believe Easter is a legitimate Christian holiday, that would mean I believe it's the celebration of that resurrection, right?
Yeah, there's no way of getting around. The women went to the tomb on the first day of the week, and we all know what that is in Hebrew.
Well, and that certainly is true, but it is also, we also do know that Jesus did rise on the first day of the week, right? And so that kind of thing there is, while I certainly understand what you're saying, I definitely do think that that's one of those things where, unfortunately, we just can't read too much into that, because we actually, if we do, then we would start having questions about the New Testament itself, right? Why does Jesus resurrect on the first day?
Right. Well, I actually go back to this. So, the 10 plagues during or the 7 plagues, sorry, under Egypt was all to decimate their gods, right? The frog god, that god, it was all their gods, the fly god, everything. And so he totally decimated and made a mockery of their gods. And that's why a lot of Egyptians fled Egypt along with the Israelites, because these gods didn't take care of us, right? And then the last one, which I can't remember what the god of death is there in Egypt off the top of my head. I was just, you know who it is. I can't remember. It's
Anubis, actually.
Yes. So that god let them down as well, because he took all the firstborn of everything, the cattle, the sheep, all that stuff. He took all that stuff, and the firstborn of every family. And that was not just the firstborn boy. It was also the firstborn girl, because it said child. So if you had a firstborn that was a girl, that one was gone too. It just so happened that Pharaoh had 2 boys, and one survived, and the other one didn't.
But the one thing I want to stress here, though, just to kind of, because the point that I'm trying to make is as far as it is, true, like I said, that the name Easter, it's a Germanic word. It's possibly related to a goddess, but we don't know for a fact. But it's just important for us to remember the original name of the holiday is Pascha, and Pascha is derived originally from Pesach, right? In other words, this was a holiday originally meant to, and in fact, there was another thing I wanted to kind of briefly reference real quick, so I'll go ahead and mention it now. The Socrates Scholasticas quote. It's an accurate quote. He does say it doesn't, in his recollection, Easter did not start with the apostles, but rather directly after the apostles, right? He thought it was the second generation. 100% correct. Right. The problem with the quote, though, is that quote has been abridged, is kind of the best way to put it. You could also say, translated, so that people better understand what's being talked about, right? And that's why you see the word Easter show up in that Socrates Scholasticas quote. The problem, though, is that he would have never known that holiday nor that word, right?
Right. He was
and so what he was calling it would have been Pascha, and he would say, that Pascha was a holiday that was not established by the apostles, right? But that was coming later on. Now, whether or not he's right about that, I'm not really sure. He could be. Obviously, we do have reference to Polycarp. Polycarp's the second generation, and we don't have reference to the first generation. So it's pulling hairs, in my personal opinion, to say first, second generation. We know it was early Christians, right? But regardless, I do think it's important to note, only because what it effectively does is it not only demonstrates that the Easter pagan connection can't be trusted because it's not the original name, but it also gives a new connection that we have to deal with. Pascha and Pesach are intimately related, right? And so because of that, we can actually see how the Christian holiday Pascha, which we today call Easter, developed out of the Jewish holiday Pesach, which again, we can find all the way back to the Quartodeciman controversy. And this is actually something I would recommend.
What year is that?
So the Quartodeciman controversy starts in the second generation of Christians. Polycarp is discussing it with a Christian from, I believe, actually from Rome. They both have a conversation about it. And then it continues on for the next 200 years. And the person who does squash it is Constantine. Now, it is 100% right that Constantine said, we will celebrate the Pascha on the day that it is celebrated in Rome, right? That quote that you put up is 100% accurate. There's two important contexts, though, that we need to remember when we look at that. The first one is this Quartodeciman controversy that Constantine is squashing has existed for 200 years, right? And the second one is how they did it in Rome was how the Roman Christians did it, not how the pagans at the time, right? Because, and this is where I go back to this Polycarp conversation, right? They had the Quartodecimans who thought we worship on, or we celebrate rather, on the Passover feast day. And then you had the non-Quartodecimans, people like Irenaeus and some of these guys, right, who would say, well, we celebrate on the first Sunday. And then, of course, you eventually have that turning into the first Sunday after the vernal equinox. But nonetheless, you can kind of see this, this dispute was arising amongst Christians during the second generation of Christianity, right after the apostles have died, right? And Constantine does put his little stamp of approval on one of the either sides, but that's not because Constantine is trying to reestablish paganism. It's because he's trying to squash a long-standing Christian beef so that he can play hero, right? And it's actually, you can see something similar in Arianism. We know that Constantine didn't actually believe in the Nicene Creed, that he wasn't a Trinitarian, because he admitted it. He would later go on to adopt Arian beliefs, and then after that, he died as a semi-Arian, right?
I would go as far as say I don't think Constantine. I mean, I can't be for sure, but my opinion, he was never saved.
And there's some good argument for that. To be honest, I won't come down one way or the other, only because I think it's God's ultimate choice, right? Of course, but I will say. If he was a theologian, he'd be a theologian I would never trust. You know what I mean?
Well, the other side of it is he ran a failing empire at the time, if you will.
Yeah.
So if he would have approached God and turned to God, I mean, look at how many times you had this one little thread, and somebody in the Bible turns to God. Well, Abram was there. You have, Abram after his mess ups, all that. Turn to God with the nation, right? With the nation. Could have changed the whole tidal wave of history, but God does also have his people in place, if you will, to make things certain happen. That it's kind of like, I'll throw this out there. I think that there's probably been 7 times that the Antichrist has actually been, there are many Antichrists, but that setup, but it just wasn't time yet. God said, no, this guy's gone. It could have been Hitler. It could have been Stalin at the time. It could have been, just recently, then you can go back to the 1800s. You can go back to what happened in Britain. A lot of things where you had one country that held all that stuff, but the end times wasn't ready yet. It was just that, because the devil doesn't know, right? It's kind of like the Irish prayer. They be dead a half hour before the devil knows it, right?
And that there is a question that was asked by Nicholas that we'll get to that kind of perfectly describes that. But the point there is just kind of to say, though, I think what we have, it's actually an exact reversal of what people think, right? Constantine is not mixing Christianity with paganism. Constantine is trying to take certain elements of Christianity and make them his elements so that he can play hero, right? So it's not but notice what that means, though. And again, this is obviously we're here to have a discussion, so I don't expect you to leave and say, oh, well, I think that CJ was right or something like that. Right? But when it comes to Easter, I would implore you, consider what that would mean for Easter if it's him trying to play hero rather than him mixing it with the paganism. In other words, if it's the pagans copying the Christians, not the Christians copying the pagans, what that would mean is Easter is a Christian holiday. And if you want to call it Pascha, that's fine. I have no issue with anybody calling it Pascha. But that would mean it is a Christian holiday that pagans tried to co-opt, not a pagan holiday that Christians tried to co-opt. You see what I mean?
Well, can I preface this? The Pascha means nothing unless the Sunday that was the Feast of First Fruits, like it was in 28 or 30 AD, or it is, this in our time right now. This would be how it would be set up. Mm-hmm. You basically have the 4 Sabbaths in a row. 3 are your regular Passover, the slaughter of the lamb and the eating of it, and then you have the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Then you have a regular Shabbat, which is basically your Sabbath day, and then you have the Feast of First Fruits. So those 3 very rarely line up. There's only a few dates in history versus the rest of the dates in history where Easter flops around all the time because it's set up on the vernal equinox and the first Sunday after that. So that's why I put up that chart, because there's many of them. You can just go on there and they'll send it to you. You just say, hey, I want to see 0 AD under the Hebrew, because the Hebrew calendar really hasn't changed for 3,000 years. It's still kind of the same thing. We're at 5,768 is where we're at now. And then you go into, the Augustine calendar, you have the Julian calendar, now you got the Gregorian calendar. And previous to that, you had pretty much sundials and whatever the Babylonians took care of. So it's not very accurate by the sun, if you will. Now, that's how we're set up now. We're on a solar calendar for the past 2,400 years or something like that, because even the Greek calendar was more like the Hebrew calendar, where they had to add days to it. It was a lunar calendar that kept 28 to 30 days. So
yeah, the Julian calendar, actually, it's funny. I've actually done an episode on this because of my holiday studies. The Julian calendar was established in 46 BC, which also is a year that was 90 days longer than any other year in order to compensate for the calendar switch. So it's actually a 445 day year instead of a 365 day year.
Why not?
Super bizarre. But
why not?
Yeah, no, I know, right? It's the weirdest time in history to read about, but it's Julius Caesar, and he's dealing with. Honestly, they got to make a whole trilogy about Julius Caesar in Hollywood. I don't know why they haven't, because that was real life.
The first movie was 3 hours long.
Yeah,
back in the 40s, it's 3 hours long. They said no more of that. But
for sure.
Yeah. So I mean, if the Roman Empire hadn't come around, not saying that we wouldn't have a Jesus Christ, but I don't think it would have fit into what. It's just the way God has it planned out. He knows what's going to happen. Causes things in my life, and I'm just a little pawn in the freaking chessboard. I'm nothing, and yet in my life, I mean, I should be dead 20 times over. It's just crazy. It's like some of the stuff I've just wait, are you kidding me? I just missed that, or something happened, or whatever. It's just some of it my fault, some of them not my fault. And the other side of it is with the Pascha thing. So my whole thing is, my mom knows it, daughter knows it, my son knows it. I celebrate the Passover, so I do the lamb on Passover. I get a leg of lamb. I do the Passover. I'm not Hebrew and all that stuff, but I do the celebration of the Lamb without a blemish, the Lord Jesus Christ, on that night. And I don't have the ham like I used to on the Easter. It's not because I don't like ham or anything. It's just, to me, it sounds like I'm kind of putting into it. Now that may be a bit over legislative for me, but at the same time, I still got leftover lamb. Now, if you've ever had a lamb inside a tortilla, so to me, it was fun with the kids, with the Easter bunny and all that stuff. But that's when I got kind of leery of it. Was like, my son was 10, daughter was 7 at the time, and it just got weird. We were at a Baptist church back east. It got weird. It was just like, wait, this isn't right. It's like, now they're giving away money in the eggs. So obviously you have those old plastic eggs, right? And they would hide money in them and all that stuff. So I was just like, oh, this is weird. Normally, you just dyed the eggs, and then we forgot one in the cupboard somewhere, and it stunk to high heaven after a couple months after nobody found it. It's just like one of those things. But the when my kids got older, 15 or whatever, started basically doing it on the 14th of Nisan, and that fluctuates it could be April 22nd, it could be April 4th, it could be any day of the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday through Saturday is what Nisan 14th could turn on, Nisan, and then the 15th the same thing. It's just the next day, which leads us to if you ever want to do it, we can have a discussion about the the December 25th thing, Centernella Day or whoever's day it was. But, I truly believe that Jesus Christ, because you can actually back it up to where John the Baptist was born 6 months before, almost to the day that Jesus Christ was. So Jesus Christ was born during the Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot, which is either September or October. And then if you pass, with the Passover, that was, his death. So basically the Feast of Tabernacles, if you draw the line with, you draw the line with the encampment of all the 12 tribes around the tabernacle, because the tabernacle is in the center. It forms a cross, too short on one side just because of the population of the clans. But everything about the tabernacle was Jesus Christ. Everything about it. Now, he's the mercy seat, is he not? Isn't that where we take our prayers to, and our
and well, I'd have to pause on that just for a minute, just because I do actually believe I have some. You may have seen him before, but but we could have that conversation another time, because this has been.
I'm not beating you up about it. I'm not beating.
No, you're totally good. You're totally good. I just wanted to get us over to some of our questions and stuff like that. You're totally welcome to come on, have another conversation about Easter. Problem. We can talk about Christmas as well. I enjoyed this, actually.
If I can get some population, maybe you could come on my channel someday.
Yeah, for sure. 100%. I'm down.
That'd work. All right. Who's got the
let's go ahead and get to some of these questions real quick. And I'll go ahead and just let us each respond. Some of them are very obviously pointed to one or the other, but so this one says, was fertility worship with Ishtar incorporated into Easter later on? I assume that's to me, because I obviously believe it wasn't direct. And this was from Kevin. So I'll go ahead and answer first here real quick. I do not believe that there is any evidence of fertility worship or Ishtar worship in Easter. It is true that eggs have been a symbol of fertility throughout history. It is actually not as true with the hair. People think that the hair is a symbol of fertility. I have personally not found any evidence to suggest that. It seems to me like the hair, which it was originally a hare and not a bunny, by the way. They are technically different animals, but it's kind of like talking about coyote versus wolf, but regardless. The reason that the hare was a symbol of Easter, as far as I've been able to gather, and by the way, if you don't like associating the hare with Easter, that's perfectly fine. My dad never taught me about an Easter bunny, and I'm all the better for it. And I mean that. But the association seems to be more the hare with spring and not so much the hare with Easter at first. And then eventually it becomes the hare with Easter, because Easter was the big festival that people were celebrating during the spring. So it's kind of a long, slow drudge. Eggs, while they are symbols of fertility, are not incorporated into Easter because of fertility. They're incorporated into Easter because of the idea of rebirth in Jesus's end, right? His resurrection. And again, if you have an issue with that, that's perfectly fine, right? I'm defending the holiday, not necessarily the practices, although I would say the practices weren't pagan. And even at that, the egg and Ishtar are not related, and the hare and Ishtar are not related. So even if those things were pagan, which I don't believe they are, but even if they were, they would be Germanic pagan, not Mesopotamian pagan. Now, of course, that's my answer, but somebody else might have another. And then Alec, go ahead and give your thoughts on the question.
Well, just on your last part, our ancient ancestors were very, very pagan. They built
Very
Hadrian's
true.
Wall. They built Hadrian's Wall to keep themselves safe, because the Scots especially, they just weren't going to be messed around with. Then you have the Norse that attacked everybody else, and you have all the other fun stuff. They had an easy time going through the Gauls and the Germanic tribes until they got up to the British Isles and to Scandinavia, and then Rome kind of said, "I think this is where our line ends." But as far as the fertility, that was a big worshiping thing ever since pagan's been pagan. I mean, the whorehouses in Greece and all that stuff, Rome, all around. I think there's mention of the bathhouses and outside of Jerusalem, as a matter of fact, where they had what do you call them, temple prostitutes or whatever it was, but they were not inside Jerusalem, but outside Jerusalem. So there's a lot of the fertility thing going on, not necessarily having baby fertility, but there's a lot of, they don't call it the oldest profession in the world for nothing. And, so yeah, the temple prostitutes, the virgin thing, that's pretty hard to find a virgin anymore. So the problem with, the fertility thing, that's the thing was bigger than most people think, just because of the way that things were with the temples, whether it was, obviously it wasn't God driven, it wasn't Christ driven. It was based off of somebody's folklore hero, build a statue, and away we go. And Friday, I just found out she's a god of fertility, the Norse god that they named Friday after. She's a fertility god. No doubt. Date on Friday night, right? Let's go out on Friday night. Don't have to work on Saturday. No, that was before, but now most people work on weekends or whatever. So Aphrodite and Diana and all of those were all goddesses of love, but then they have a counterpart that's more promiscuous than that god. So yeah, I mean, fertility had a lot to do with whatever they called it until it became the Easter that we know today. And like I said, I'll stick to the Passover, which follows the Jewish calendar. And I kind of done away with, I'll go to church on Sunday, but I'm not going this Easter Sunday. Why not? Because I can go on Saturday. So.
For sure. All right. Our next question is, Richard Neal, I believe, asked this one. Says, sort of a tangent, but when the sky darkened, did it count as 2 days? No. And this will actually come up again here in another question. But the Hebrew day was considered to start at sundown. That is true. However, the Hebrews were aware of how long that was typically supposed to take. So like when the clouds covered, or if there was something, that would cause the sky to darken in a different way, maybe like a volcano or something like that. I don't think there's any volcanoes by Israel, but nonetheless, something like that. They were aware of the fact that your typical 12-hour of time or there's about hadn't actually passed yet. And they had various ways of figuring that kind of thing out. But go ahead and answer if you had anything to add to that.
No, that's about all that needs. No 2 days.
Yeah, and this one we'll just go ahead real quickly. Did the Hebrew day start right at sundown, or did it have to wait until sunrise? It would start right at sundown. In fact, if you celebrate Jewish holidays like I do, You start celebrating the evening before the first day, which is kind of cool, actually. And it reminds me of being a kid because we do that with Christmas Eve, right? So it's kind of cool there. And then this is the last one that we have. If this is from Brother Nicholas. If non-Christians celebrate Easter with zero Christianity and all the trappings of a fertility festival, can we say that they are celebrating a pagan Easter? So my answer to this question, I understand the question. It's basically like, so if we see the modern example of what Easter is, in other words, is it, if we agree that it wasn't based off of, and of course, you're going to answer this differently because you don't agree with me on this issue, but if we and Nicholas were to hypothetically agree that Easter was a Christian holiday, I don't know if he does or not, but regardless, originally, could we say now that a pagan Easter has been established? In other words, do we have a new pagan Easter? And the first thing I would say is I would just want people to clarify what they mean by pagan. I already know what Brother Nick means by pagan. And so I'll address that here in a second. But if you use the word pagan dictionarily, I don't think you could call it a pagan Easter. I think you'd have to call it a secular Easter, perhaps a carnal Easter. But since it doesn't have religious connotations for most people, I think you'd have to, if you're using the dictionary definition word pagan, or excuse me, using the colloquial definition word pagan, meaning something that derives from some form of traditional religion, then I don't think you could say that. Now, and this is why I had to correct myself. If you're using dictionary definition pagan, which just means non-Christian, and that's actually what Brother Nick means to say by it, then yes, you could say there is certainly a pagan Easter. You would just kind of have to explain that to people. And I would want to preface this, if it was me speaking, obviously everybody can do what they want to do, but if it was me speaking, I would want to preface this by saying, I believe Easter is an originally Christian holiday, but certain elements have led it to be paganized, right? Not necessarily even then too, you have a conversation that has to go back, right? Because the Oster hare is a children's story. It's not really a pagan god or anything like that. The Easter egg hunt starts with Martin Luther. So when you have to be clear with what you're saying by pagan. And the way that I would avoid all this is just by saying not biblical, right? Do we have a not biblical Easter and a biblical Easter? And that's the way I would personally divide the two. There's nothing biblical about Easter bunnies and Easter egg hunts and stuff like that. It's just kind of a thing that people are doing, right? There is stuff that's biblical about celebrating the resurrection of Jesus, about going and having a festival or feast or something along those lines with your congregation or family, things of that nature. So that would be kind of my answer to it. But go ahead.
Yeah, family gatherings are all good, but there are those. Apparently, I didn't have time to look it up and research it, but I saw where there's a. I just don't like going to those sites. It's a Wiccan calendar, and Easter's part of it. There's vernal equinox dealio. So there are still people that celebrate. May not be exactly what we're calling Easter, but it's around this time. As far as because I don't track that stuff, but from what I did read a little bit, it's gotten a lot larger, populated with the Wicca and the we'll just call it Satanism straight out, because the Luciferian Church. Aaron Rodgers came out, right? I mean, there you go. So anything that's anti-God, not Jesus Christ driven, it's secular for sure, but it can also dip into what's behind the curtain. There's a curtain in the back of the room. You're not supposed to go there unless you have the pass or something like that. I just try and stay away from things like that. I don't even worry about it anymore, to be honest with you. If somebody wants to listen to me tell them something, then I'll do that, but not necessarily drag somebody to, you know what I mean? So, I mean, to me, yeah, I mean, I'm not happy about it, but at the same time, it's like yeah, Jesus Christ did rise from the dead. That's what I'm celebrating, right? You know, my Lord and Savior, you know, beat death. There is no sting left, and he's offered the same for us. That's where I'm at with that.
Alrighty, and that is a good place for us to conclude here. So with that, let me go ahead and say to the audience, thank you all very much for being here. I appreciate you all tremendously. If you enjoyed this video, please do remember to like and share this video. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you are new here. Also, remember, I will be discussing both this holiday and Passover itself in the month of April. April 15th, we have a Hag Sameach video on Passover. April 17th, we'll have a Hag Sameach video on Easter. Also, anyone else who wants to have this discussion, if you believe that there is paganism or secularism or stuff like that, that is you know, the primary influence of these different holidays, we're open to have conversation here. As you guys can see, this was a lot more productive than the first time that me and Alec had spoken. That's definitely a good thing, because that's the point of these kinds of things, right? We want to make sure that we don't, you know, we don't really want to have that kind of.
To be honest, there's you know, it wasn't towards you the first time. There was another person who was a little bit more protective of what we know. But no, I've always respected you, bro. Yeah, I know we don't 100%. You know, we have different curves in certain things, but we're pretty much there. So it's not like you know, I need to wield the sword and chop your neck off and all that other stuff. You know, don't need any of that. We can say, hey, you know, this is how brothers treat brothers, right?
Yeah, for certain. And yeah, and let me know, guys, by the way, and as well as Alec, right? Because I'm sure he'll be looking at the comment section here. Any questions, comments, criticisms, concerns, critiques, or anything like that in the comment section below. I'll be responding. Like I said, I'm sure he will. Also, Alec, you have free reign again to download this video onto your own channel if you like. And yeah, and also don't forget to vote in that little poll. Looks like right now it is 67% no and 33% yes. How many people have voted? I got to check on my phone because I can't actually see the answer on my computer. Let's say 9 votes total. I believe it does. 9 votes total. So what is that? That'd be, I think, 6 yes or 6 no, 3 yes for sure. Oh, you're supposed to close the poll so you can see the results. Thank you, Nicholas. I know how to do things, I promise. Man. Nonetheless, it was a great conversation, guys. I appreciate you. We'll probably have another chat sometime here in the future because this was definitely a very productive one. But I digress. God bless you all. It was a great conversation. And we are going to go ahead and get out of here. Well, here, sorry, I gotta end with my tagline, right? Yeah, if the Lord wills and tarries, we will see you here soon.